Did you kill Grace Mullane? Jesse Kempson, you're under arrest for the murder of Grace Mullane.
The first photo appeared online at 7 in the morning. Thousands of people saw it before anyone could stop it. At first, viewers thought it was fake. Some assumed it was a horror edit. Others believed it was some kind of dark internet meme. But within minutes, something became clear. If you thought social media is a safe place, think again. This wasn't fiction. A real person had been murdered, and the killer had uploaded the evidence himself. Not to hide it, not to confess, but to be seen. And that single moment, a photo, a post, a few seconds of loading, reveals something deeply unsettling about the modern internet. Because this was not an isolated incident. This same scenario has played out in New York, in Tokyo, in Cleveland, in Spain, in New Zealand, different killers, different victims, different platforms, but the same twisted logic driving every single one of them. If you stay until the end of this video, you will understand exactly why some killers don't run. They post. And why the internet, something billions of us use every single day, may be making that worse. Before we go any further, if you are new here, this channel covers the darkest corners of true crime, psychology, and the digital world. If that interests you, hit subscribe right now. It's free, and you will not want to miss what's coming later in this video. Now, let's continue. For most of human history, murderers tried to disappear. They fled. They hid. They destroyed evidence. Today, some of them post. They live stream. They upload. They brag. They sit and watch the reactions pour in. And sometimes the crime itself becomes part of the performance. The question is no longer just why someone kills. The question is why some killers want an audience. And once you start looking into the cases where violence intersects with social media, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. Different countries, different platforms, different motives, but the same digital stage. Because in the age of social media, attention itself can become part of the crime. Here is something that will make you think twice the next time you accept a follow request from a stranger. Utica, New York. July 2019. 17-year-old Bianca Devins had built a quiet life online. She shared artwork, photos with friends, small glimpses of her personality. Her online world was where she felt most understood. She had followers who genuinely cared about her, and she posted the way most teenagers do. Openly, creatively, without suspecting for a single second that someone in her comments was watching her with obsession. Bianca had met a man named Brandon Clark on Instagram. At first, the connection seemed harmless. Clark appeared polite, friendly, someone who wanted to help. Friends and family described him as trustworthy, as someone who genuinely seemed to care about Bianca. But the reality of their relationship was complicated. Bianca saw him as a friend. Clark wanted something more, and that gap, that difference in expectation, would ultimately cost her everything. Because rejection, when combined with obsession, can turn into something far darker than most of us are willing to imagine. The night before the murder, the two attended a concert together in New York City. Afterward, they drove back toward Utica. At some point during that drive, an argument began. Investigators believe it was triggered by Clark witnessing Bianca showing affection toward another man earlier that evening. For him, that moment became a breaking point. In the early hours of July 14th, Bianca Devins was killed. But the crime did not end there, because Brandon Clark then did something almost unimaginable. He photographed the scene, and he posted the images online, not accidentally, not out of panic, deliberately, as if sharing the act was always part of the plan. Within minutes, those images began spreading. Instagram, Twitter, Discord, anonymous message boards. Some. People reacted with horror, others with morbid curiosity, and some, and this part should disturb every single one of us, with celebration. The internet moved faster than moderation ever could. Screenshots migrated from platform to platform before any algorithm flagged them. Before police even arrived at the scene, thousands of strangers had already seen the aftermath of Bianca's death. For her family, the tragedy multiplied in ways no family should ever have to face. They weren't only grieving a daughter, they were fighting a digital wildfire that refused to be extinguished. Months later, copies of those images were still circulating. Years later, some still are. The crime itself lasted minutes. The online echo is still going. And that raises a question that should make your skin crawl. When a killer chooses to share a crime online, what are they actually seeking? Shock, fame, control, or something more primitive? Attention. Here is something that psychologists have discovered that most people find genuinely unsettling. The human brain does not clearly distinguish between positive and negative attention. Both activate the same reward systems. Both can feel like validation. And in extreme cases, in individuals who already have violent tendencies, that reward system can become tangled up with something monstrous. Historically, killers sometimes communicated with the public. The Zodiac Killer wrote letters to newspapers. The Son of Sam did the same. They wanted recognition. But the key difference was that those men needed intermediaries, editors, police, journalists. Someone had to decide whether to publish. There was a delay, a filter, a barrier between the killer and the audience. Now that barrier is gone. A phone, an internet connection, one upload, and a killer can reach millions instantly. No filter, no delay, no editor deciding whether the public needs to know, just content. And in that shift, something fundamental changed about how violence can be performed. The crime becomes content. The audience becomes part of the experience. Likes, shares, comments, reactions. Every notification becomes proof that people are watching. And for some individuals, that proof can become addictive. The act stops being just a crime. It becomes an event, something that happened in the world, something people are talking about, something permanent. And that permanence, that sense of being embedded in the public consciousness, may be exactly what certain killers are looking for. Which brings us to a case in Japan that demonstrates something even more disturbing. Because this time, the internet wasn't just used after the crime. It was used to find the victims. What you are about to hear should change how you think about online strangers who seem too understanding. Japan, 2017. A man named Takahiro Shiraishi was searching for something very specific online. Not fame, not followers, not clout. People who wanted to die. On Twitter, Shiraishi began seeking out users who were posting about suicidal thoughts. And when he found them, he didn't report the posts. He responded. His messages sounded sympathetic, supportive, patient. He told people he understood their pain. He said he could help. Sometimes he suggested they could die together. And to someone sitting alone at 2 a.m, drowning in a crisis they cannot explain to the people around them, that message can feel like the first genuine human connection in weeks. But Shiraishi had no empathy. What he had was a strategy. One by one, victims accepted his invitation to visit his apartment in Zama, near Tokyo. Most were young women, some were teenagers. Between August and October of 2017, 9 people entered that apartment. 9 people never left. When police searched the apartment, they found what they found. I won't describe it in detail, but the investigation revealed something that shook Japan to its core. Shiraishi had used Twitter as a hunting ground, a platform designed for communication, for sharing ideas, connecting communities, following news, had been deliberately weaponized to locate people at their most vulnerable. And it worked, because those victims believed they were speaking to someone who cared. Here is the part of this story that stays with me. Online identities are easy to construct. You can appear kind, empathetic, helpful, safe. You can spend weeks, months, building a profile that makes strangers feel comfortable. And the person on the other side of that screen has almost no way to verify who they are actually talking to. Shiraishi understood that. He understood exactly where to find people who were already struggling, already isolated, already reaching out in desperation. And he turned that vulnerability into access. The story shocked Japan, but it also forced a painful global conversation. Social media doesn't just spread information. It exposes human need. It reveals loneliness. It lights up the places where people are hurting, and sometimes predators are watching for exactly those lights. Now, I want to tell you about a case where the crime was committed in real time, while the killer was already recording. Not after, not minutes later, before. As if the camera was the point. Cleveland, Ohio, Easter Sunday, April 16th, 2017. A man named Steve Stevens got into his car and started driving through the city. At some point that afternoon, he pressed record. In the footage, he approached a random stranger walking slowly along the street. 74-year-old Robert Godwin Sr. Godwin was a retired man, a father, a grandfather. He had absolutely no connection to Stevens. He had done nothing wrong. He was simply outside on a Sunday afternoon, collecting aluminum cans along the road. Stevens stopped beside him. He told the man to say the name of his ex-girlfriend, a woman he blamed for his anger, a woman who had nothing to do with what was about to happen. And then, on camera, with millions of eventual viewers, Stevens fired. The video was uploaded to Facebook. Within hours, it had spread across the internet. Millions of people watched Robert Godwin die, an elderly man who had never harmed anyone, a stranger who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, made into content, made into a spectacle. The footage triggered a nationwide manhunt. Police across multiple states searched for Stevens. 2 days later, he was found at a McDonald's drive-thru in Pennsylvania. When officers closed in, Stevens took his own life, but the video remained, shared, copied, reposted. Even when Facebook removed the original upload, mirrors appeared. Other platforms hosted copies. The internet had absorbed it, and that is one of the defining horrors of the digital age. Once something enters the internet ecosystem, it does not disappear. It can be buried, it can be suppressed, but it cannot be fully erased. Robert Godwin's family had to grieve publicly, repeatedly, every time a new wave of curious strangers went looking for that footage. That is the hidden cost no one discusses when we talk about these cases. The victims' families don't just lose someone. They lose control of the story. They lose the right to grieve privately, because the crime was already content before their loved one was even cold. So, what connects all of these cases? It isn't just violence, it's visibility. Every single one of these crimes involved an element of performance, posting photos, recording video, using social media to locate victims, sharing evidence, seeking reaction. The internet offers something no previous generation of killers ever had: instant recognition. Even if that recognition comes wrapped in horror and outrage, it is still recognition. Psychologists studying online behavior have identified something important about how attention works on the human brain. We are a social species. We evolved in small groups where recognition meant belonging, and belonging meant survival. Approval from the group was not just pleasant, it was necessary. But that same instinct, the deep ancient hunger for recognition, has been transported into an environment that our brains are nowhere near equipped to handle. Because now, one post can reach 10 million people. One video can be viewed in 100 countries within hours. And even outrage, even people watching in disgust, sharing the video to condemn it, still registers to a certain kind of mind as proof that they matter, that they are seen. Psychologists sometimes call this infamy culture. Instead of seeking admiration, some individuals seek notoriety. They want their name spoken. They want their story told, even if what their name is attached to is something terrible. Historically, this desire has existed for centuries, but social media does not just enable it, it accelerates it. It provides instant confirmation. It turns an act of violence into a trending topic within minutes, and it guarantees something that murderers operating in previous generations could never have: an audience that never stops scrolling. Here is where the story turns and makes you feel shecked even more, because the same internet that amplifies crime sometimes destroys the criminal. The same platforms that killers use to perform for an audience can also create an irrefutable, time-stamped, location-tagged trail of evidence. And sometimes that trail is exactly what puts them behind bars. Auckland, New Zealand, December 2018. Grace Mullane had just graduated from university. Like thousands of young travelers every year, she had decided to spend a year exploring the world. She had been documenting her adventures online. Her family back in England followed along from home, watching photos appear, reading messages, feeling connected across the distance. Everything seemed normal. Then she matched with someone on Tinder, a man named Jesse Kempson. Dating apps are built on quick connections. Two people swipe, a conversation starts, maybe drinks, maybe dinner, and the overwhelming majority of the time, nothing terrible happens. But this time was different. Security cameras later showed Grace and Kempson entering a hotel together. After that moment, Grace Mullane was never seen alive again. Days passed before her family realized something was wrong. She had stopped replying to messages. Her birthday arrived. She didn't answer. Police began searching. Investigators eventually discovered that Grace had been killed shortly after the date. Kempson attempted to hide what he had done. He searched online for ways to dispose of a body. He rented equipment. He worked to clean the room. He buried Grace in a remote area outside the city. But the digital world had recorded far more than he understood. CCTV footage, search histories, browser activity, location data from his phone. Every step he took had left a mark. The same technology that allows two strangers to match and meet within seconds had also created a precise, detailed record of exactly what happened, and that record led investigators straight to him. Jesse Kempson was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The case shocked New Zealand, but it also revealed something important. Online dating creates connections faster than human intuition can process. In previous generations, people generally met through overlapping social circles. There were natural vetting mechanisms, people who vouched for you, reputations that preceded you. Now, two complete strangers can arrange to meet in under 5 minutes. And while most of those meetings are entirely harmless, some are not. And the difficult truth is that we are not always equipped to tell the difference. This is something psychologists warn about constantly, and almost no one takes seriously enough until it is too late. When you look at someone's social media profile, your brain does something automatic. It begins to fill in the gaps. You see photos, you see captions, you see their music taste, their sense of humor, their favorite places. You see them laughing with friends, and your brain, doing exactly what it evolved to do in small communities where people's public behavior reflected their true character, begins to construct a model of who this person is. Psychologists call this the illusion of familiarity. We mistake curation for truth. We mistake a filtered highlight reel for a personality. And in normal social life, that is relatively harmless. But in the context of online predators, it becomes a weapon. Because a predator can engineer familiarity. They can spend weeks, months, building a profile that feels warm and trustworthy. They can adjust their persona based on who they are talking to. They can be whoever they need to be to make the other person feel safe. And by the time the other person realizes the persona was constructed, it is often too late. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is not a failure of caution. It is the exploitation of a deep and very human cognitive bias, one that became dramatically more dangerous the moment we started building relationships through screens. Now, the next case. Because just when you think you have a handle on how social media intersects with crime, this one introduces a new dimension. What happens when a convicted killer uses social media not to hide who they are, but to become a public figure? Spain. For years, José Jurado Montilla had been known to law enforcement. Decades earlier, he had been convicted of multiple murders and spent many years in prison. Eventually, he was released. And when he returned to society, he opened TikTok. Montilla began posting videos of himself traveling across Spain, walking through mountains, hiking remote trails, standing at scenic overlooks, talking into the camera about his past. In many of his videos, he insisted he was innocent of his previous convictions. He positioned himself as a misunderstood wanderer, a man simply trying to move through the world. His followers watched him hike through forests, across rural roads, through remote valleys. At first glance, he seemed like an unusual but harmless elderly traveler, eccentric, maybe even a little sympathetic. But investigators would later discover something deeply wrong. During the time Montilla was posting those videos, 2 people had disappeared. One was a young university student. The other was a woman who had been hiking with him. Both cases eventually led investigators back to Montilla. And here is the part that is almost hard to believe. When police began analyzing his TikTok content, they found something he had not accounted for. His videos were full of details, landmarks visible in the background, road signs caught in wide shots, specific geographic features, identifiable buildings, small details that individually meant nothing, but together, piece by piece, frame by frame, they formed a map, a precise, unintentional, self-documented map of everywhere Montilla had been. Investigators cross-referenced the footage with known locations. They reconstructed his movements across weeks of travel, And eventually, those movements led them to him. Montilla was arrested at a sports bar near the Spanish border. The man who had used TikTok to construct a public persona of the harmless wanderer had also used TikTok to leave an exact trail of everywhere he had gone. The internet can make people famous, it can make people sympathetic, it can build a story around someone that feels completely believable, but it can also make people traceable in ways they never anticipated. And sometimes the content killers create to control their image becomes the very evidence that destroys them. If you look carefully at every case we have covered, another theme begins to surface. Some offenders do not simply use the internet, they perform for it. Posting videos, uploading photos, creating narratives around themselves, interacting with viewers. It begins to look disturbingly similar to something we all recognize. Influencer culture, content, followers, engagement. Except the content is real crime, the engagement is horror, and the following is built on the worst moments of other people's lives. In some cases, offenders seem to actively enjoy the attention, messages from strangers, news coverage, online debate about whether they are guilty. Every comment, every share, every article becomes confirmation that the world is paying attention. And for a certain type of personality, one that craves significance, that feels overlooked, that experiences ordinary life as invisible, that attention can feel like the only meaningful thing they have ever experienced. Which brings us to one of the most unsettling cases in this entire investigation. A teenage killer in Germany who, after committing a murder, did something that baffled investigators. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He texted his friends. Germany, 2017. A teenager named Marcel Hesse committed a murder that shocked the country. The victim was a child, 9 years old. The details of the crime were horrifying enough on their own. But what shocked investigators even more was what Hesse did immediately afterward. Instead of attempting to disappear, he sent photos to friends online, images, messages describing what had happened, proof. Some of the people who received those messages initially assumed he was joking, dark humor, some kind of sick prank. But the photos were real, and as police began their search, Hesse continued sending messages. He didn't express remorse. He didn't appear panicked. He communicated almost conversationally, as if the murder was something that had happened and now needed to be shared, like any other significant event in his life. He eventually turned himself in at a restaurant, calm, controlled, and investigators described his subsequent confession as cold and mechanical, almost detached from the gravity of what he had done. The case raised a question that is genuinely difficult to answer. Why would someone share evidence of their own crime? There is no strategic reason to do this. It doesn't protect them. It doesn't benefit them legally. It accelerates their capture. And yet, several of the cases in this investigation involve offenders doing exactly that. Uploading, messaging, broadcasting. The answer, according to researchers who study violent offenders, may lie in something deeply human and deeply broken. The desire to be witnessed. Some people commit acts of violence in states of extreme emotional dysregulation, moments where ordinary social feedback loops are completely offline. But even in those moments, the instinct to be seen can override everything else. To have the act acknowledged, to have another human being confirm that the event was real, that it happened, that they were capable of it. The crime itself was not enough. The act required an audience to feel complete. There is another layer to this problem that almost never gets discussed, and it implicates every single person watching this video, including me, including you. Algorithms. Social media platforms are engineered with one primary objective: engagement. Time on platform, clicks, shares, comments. And the emotions that drive the most engagement are not the comfortable ones. They are not joy or warmth or inspiration. They are shock, anger, fear, disgust, outrage. These emotions make people stop scrolling. They make people react. They make people share. And when people share, the algorithm sees engagement. And engagement means visibility, which means more people see it, which means more reactions, which means even more visibility. A violent incident can become trending news within minutes, not because a journalist decided it was important, not because an editor weighed the public interest, but because an algorithm detected that people were stopping to look and rewarded that content with reach. And sometimes, that reach is exactly what certain offenders were hoping for. This does not mean social media causes violence. Human beings were capable of terrible acts long before the first algorithm was written. But platforms can amplify violence. They can transform a local tragedy into a global spectacle. They can guarantee an audience to someone who was seeking one. And that changes something, not just about crime, about us. Because every time we share disturbing content out of outrage or curiosity or the simple human impulse to say, look at this terrible thing, we are also feeding the machine. We are generating the engagement that makes that content visible to more people. And in rare but real cases, we may be providing exactly the reaction that someone, somewhere, was trying to provoke. In earlier decades, crimes faded. New stories replaced old ones. News cycles moved forward. Memory is imperfect, and human attention eventually moves on. But the internet does not forget. Photos, videos, comments, screenshots, cache files on servers and places no one will ever visit. Even when platforms remove the original post, copies survive. They migrate. They replicate. They sit dormant until the next wave of curiosity digs them up. Researchers sometimes call this the digital echo. The event keeps repeating. Years later, a single search, a single forum post, a single algorithm recommendation at the bottom of a video, and suddenly the whole story resurfaces. For victims' families, this can be unbearable. Every anniversary, every news cycle that touches the case, every true crime video, and yes, I am aware of the irony of saying this in a true crime video, can become another wave of unwanted attention. Another day where strangers are looking at photos of someone they loved. Another day where the crime takes up more space in the world than the person who was killed. The event lasted hours. The echo has no end date. And that creates a strange and painful paradox for society. We want to understand these crimes. We want to learn from them. We want to build the kind of understanding that might prevent the next one. But the act of discussing them, of spreading them, of watching them, of engaging with them, can unintentionally give certain offenders something they were actively seeking: permanence. So, where is the line? How do we study violence without amplifying it? How do we tell the stories of victims without turning the killers into legends? The answer, I believe, lies in where we point the camera, not on the killer, not on the act, but on the systems around them, the platforms, the algorithms, the psychological dynamics, the patterns that repeat, the warnings that get ignored. But here is what I want to leave you with, because if this were only a story about damage, I wouldn't be telling it. The same internet that amplifies crime also helps solve it. Digital footprints, search histories, location data, time-stamped photographs, communication records, all of it leaves marks. And those marks have helped investigators close cases that once would have remained open forever. The TikTok killer's own videos mapped his movements for investigators. Grace Millane's killer was caught because his digital trail was too detailed to escape. Brandon Clark's evidence spread online before police arrived. But it also meant there was no possibility of denial. The internet can expose, it can document, it can preserve evidence in ways that are almost impossible to destroy, and it can bring justice to people who believed they had covered their tracks. Because here is the thing about performing for an audience. An audience watches back. An audience remembers. An audience screen-grabbed everything before you deleted your account. And an audience sometimes includes investigators who are very, very good at following digital trails. The internet gave killers a stage, but it also gave investigators a window. And sometimes the window is open wider than anyone expected. So, what do we take from all of this? Social media is not inherently dangerous. For most people, most of the time, it is exactly what it advertises to be: a way to connect, to share, to be part of something larger than yourself. But we should be clear-eyed about what it has also created: a world where certain individuals, people who crave significance, who feel invisible, who are willing to do terrible things to be seen, now have access to a global stage. A world where the line between a personal act and a public performance has effectively disappeared. A world where algorithms reward the content that provokes the strongest reaction. And where the human instinct to look at disturbing things, the same instinct that makes us slow down at accidents, is being systematically monetized. We are not passive observers of that world. We are participants. And knowing that changes something. It changes what we choose to click, what we choose to share, what we choose to amplify. Because every reaction is a signal, and some people are waiting to see what that signal says. If this video made you think differently about social media, about the crimes we consume, about the systems that surround both, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? I read every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. This channel exists to understand the darkest patterns in human behavior, not to celebrate them, not to sensationalize them, but to understand them. Because understanding is the only thing that has ever made any of us safer. New investigations go up regularly. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you in the next one.